We are 11 days out from the Democratic National Convention, and the Democratic ticket for the 2024 election cycle is set. Vice President Kamala Harris, the prosecutor, and Governor Tim Walz, the Midwestern straight shooter, a man who's fought on the front lines of service and politics, bring a blend of justice and authenticity that this country desperately craves. These present a clear alternative to Donald Trump, the twice embraced former convicted felon, and J.D. Vance, the Silicon Valley-backed elitist, who's lost touch with middle America. This election is shaping up to be a showdown between integrity and chaos. J.D. Vance has had the worst introduction to America as a vice presidential candidate in modern American history, worse than that of then Alaska Governor Sarah Palin in 2008. Vice President Kamala Harris and the Minnesota Marvel, Governor Tim Walz, made their debut as the 2024 Democratic ticket this past Tuesday. This pairing didn't just happen by chance. It's a ticket years in the making, built on chemistry, shared values, and a clear-eyed vision for America's future. Remember when Kamala Harris's first presidential run fizzled out before she even had a chance to think about a running mate? Well, fast forward to today, and she's not just thinking about it, she's got her ticket. And it's shaking up the entire political world. But here's the kicker. This choice didn't just come out of thin air. 5 years ago, Harris's top aides were tossing around names, and one stood out, Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio. The idea was simple but powerful. Pair Harris with a gritty, seasoned fighter from the industrial Midwest, someone who's as comfortable with union workers as he is taking down Republican talking points. But Sherrod Brown was a name that stayed tucked away in a drawer. Now you might be wondering, why Tim Walz? Why not Josh Shapiro, the political dynamo from Pennsylvania? Or Arizona has its own space cowboy, Senator Mark Kelly. The answer, my friends, lies in the kind of partner Kamala Harris needed. Someone who's not just a battle-tested politician, but a man of the people, a proven winner who can speak to the heartland with the authenticity and grit that wins elections in red states. Walz isn't just the vice president Kamala Harris wanted. He's the one she believes America needs right now. But of course, this ticket hasn't been met with just applause. On the other side of the aisle, the attacks are already flying, and they're getting personal. Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, with his own military background, is trying to take Walz down a peg, calling into question his service record and throwing around terms like stolen valor. Let's be clear. Vance's accusations have echoes of those ugly attacks from 2004, 20 years ago, when the GOP tried to tarnish John Kerry's honorable military service. Walz, despite Vance's desperate rhetoric, has never misrepresented his service. He's a man who served this country in honor. Now, as Harris's running mate, he's ready to bring that same dedication to the national stage. This morning, we're taking this conversation deeper beyond the headlines, because joining us is someone who knows these political dynamics inside and out. He's not just a rising star in his own right, but a key player in this campaign. I'm talking about the mayor of Antioch, California, and a proud surrogate for the Harris for President 2024 campaign, Lamar Hernandez-Thorpe. Mayor Hernandez-Thorpe has been on the front lines, rallying support and engaging with voters across the Golden State and beyond. He's got his finger on the pulse of what makes this ticket tick. And this morning, he's here to share his insights on what this historic candidacy means for our nation and what's going to take it to cross the finish line this November. Mayor Thorpe, welcome to the Political Mic.
Oh, well, thank you for having me.
So, Mayor Thorpe, Harris's recent speech this past Tuesday hinted a shift from a narrowly focused appeal to a broader, more inclusive message. How do you see the strategic pivot playing out in key battleground states, particularly those with a more conservative electorate? Could this be her version of Obama's red states to blue states approach, or is this a new model tailored for our current political climate?
I just think it's reality. The fact of the matter is that, man, I think back in 1964, white men overwhelmingly would vote Democrat, white working class men. Back in 2020, it was less than that. It was about 35%. And so the Democratic Party has a problem with white men. And some might argue that it's economics. I don't think it's economics. And others might argue that it's race. I think as we've become a more inclusive party, a party that believes that, African Americans have a place, Asian Americans have a place, Latino Americans everybody has a place in the Democratic Party. I think we've forgotten that that white men also have a place in our Democratic Party. And our messaging, I think, has sometimes lost touch with that. And in particularly when we get so specific to race and identity that we're leaving behind the one component that brings all of us together, including white men, and that's economics. It all comes back to your bank account. And so I think so what I said earlier was, I just think it's realistic. I just think it's a campaign that has its finger on the pulse and recognizing that the Democratic Party has had a problem in the last few years with white men, and we have to bring them back to the party, and we have to make it feel like they're included as well, and that the narrative is just as much as yours and mine and theirs.
Now, Harris and Walz have been described as having a unique chemistry that transcends the usual political calculations. Many political pundits have reported that one of the top qualities that Harris was looking for was someone that she honestly felt had her back, and someone that she felt she had a personal connection to. She, obviously took the night off on Monday night to think this thing over one last time, and then she made her decision. How crucial do you believe this chemistry will be in defining their working relationship, particularly in a high-pressure campaign environment where we are less than 100 days from the general election? What can history teach us, in your view, about the importance of such dynamics in a president?
Oh, my goodness. All you got to look at is Joe Biden. There has been I don't think in my lifetime there's ever been such a loyal vice president than President Biden when he was vice president to President Obama. He was someone who was at the White House regularly. He was someone who, when things needed to get done on Capitol Hill, President Obama knew to send Vice President Biden. And when things were getting tough on the campaign trail, we all know that Joe Biden knew how to show up for that fight. And, I see the same qualities in Governor Walz. And so I'm pretty excited about the dynamics that he brings. Loyalty is clearly important. And I don't think that there's military veteran, 20-year career, high school teacher, 20-year career. There is no more loyalty than public service. There's no more loyalty than serving our young people. There's no more loyalty than serving the country by being willing to give your life to it. And so I think that there are some outstanding choices. I love the governor of Pennsylvania. I love Governor Beshear of Kentucky. I think they're great individuals, and I think they are the future of the Democratic Party. But I also believe that she made the right choice in picking someone who's displayed loyalty, not just to his family and friends, but to the country itself and the community.
With the rise of Trumpian politics, there's been a debate about whether candidates should focus on defensive politics, reassuring middle America, or doubling down on energizing their base. Donald Trump obviously made the choice to have J.D. Vance as his running mate out of a summer that seemed to go very well for him. The Supreme Court ruled that he had immunity, going forward. The judge in Florida threw out the case pertaining to his possession of classified documents. And then there was the situation that could have ended in the end of his life, but ended up him becoming even more of a hero in the eyes of those on the right with the recent assassination attempt on his life. So the choice of J.D. Vance was made in that context, and many perceived it as a doubling down on his base. He didn't choose someone like Nikki Haley, who could have appealed to a more moderate Bush wing of the party. He did not choose Marco Rubio, who could potentially help him with Latinos. He chose someone who is a true convert of MAGA. Now, there are many who are criticizing Kamala Harris's choice of Tim Walz, being that he's a progressive governor from the Midwest who has enacted a lot of progressive policies. When you look at his record, he has enacted policies such as free, public school lunch and breakfast for children in schools. He has established or fortified a woman's right to choose in that state. He has taken meaningful action against, in favor of gun control. He has, taken positions to ensure workers' protections, paid family leave, and other programs in alignment with that. What is your response to those that criticize Kamala Harris's choice for being too progressive, for doubling down on the far left?
Well, first, I would somewhat disagree. I think Donald Trump chose a weirdo just like himself. And frankly, I think that those things that you'd mentioned that had gone well for Donald Trump, they may have gone well for him personally. They weren't going well for the country. And so, I think that he was headed down an interesting path. In terms of, Governor Walz is, I've seen some of his policies. And if we just take those examples that you took, you could, I guess, easily say progressive. There are examples that, people can look at some of the policies I've passed here in Antioch and say, oh, he's very progressive. But if you take the totality of everything, the reality is that you govern within the confines of what the budget allows you to do. And people don't take note of everything else that you do. Most of the, we have two more conservative people on my city council, yet we have all voted the same 92% of the time. And that means we've built a bipartisan coalition that's able to govern. And so if you're going to look at certain things, you can draw a picture of someone. But if you look at the totality of their work, I think Governor Walz is a reasonable guy who cares about the well-being of human beings. And if you want to call that progressive, I guess call it progressive. If you want to call that middle of the road, call it middle of the road. At the end of the day, this is a guy who has a heart. This is a guy who cares about children. This is a guy who cares about leading a country that is at a crossroads. We're either going to go back or we're going to go forward. And I think he, whether progressive or moderate or liberal, whatever, I think his heart is with America and making sure that we're passing sound policies that keep children fed, keep children in schools, keep people, make sure that people keep their health care, and a host of other just common sense ideas that I think impact everybody.
Now, J.D. Vance has been following around Kamala Harris's plane as her and her new running mate are going on tour. And he's made it a purpose to distinguish himself with that of Kamala Harris's new running mate, Governor Tim Walz. Now, he's launched a direct attack on Governor Tim Walz's military record, accusing him of stolen valor. This echoes, as I alluded to earlier, infamous 2004 campaign against John Kerry. Given the delicate nature of military service and politics, do you think these attacks will resonate with voters, or are they more likely to backfire, especially considering Trump's own controversial military deferments? You had General Mark Kelly, chief of staff to Donald Trump, actually say that Donald Trump called those who were buried at Arlington Cemetery suckers and losers.
Yeah, well, again, J.D. Vance and Donald Trump are weirdos. And if J.D. Vance wants to be following around Vice President Kamala Harris at the tarmac, I guess that's what weirdos do. I mean, I don't know what to say about that. But they are weirdos and they kind of give that vibe. And so I'm just pointing out. The reality is, I'll be honest, I find it absolutely disgusting that we even politicize military service. I don't care if you were a cook. I don't care if you went out and got a Purple Heart. Military service is military service. If you're willing to give your life up for this country, then God bless you. And for anybody to be criticizing anybody's military service, they're the suckers and they're the losers, because they were willing to do nothing compared to those who were willing to sign up and give their life for this country. And so, that's all I'm going to say about that.
So you have a lot of folks saying that the Democratic National Convention really needs to embrace or reclaim patriotism. The Democratic Convention, of course, is in 11 days. Governor Wes Moore of Maryland's call for the Harris campaign to drape itself in the American flag, flaws and all, echoes a broader push within the Democratic Party to reclaim that patriotism. Do you think this approach can effectively counter Republican narratives that often monopolize patriotic symbolism? How important do you think it is for the Harris-Walz ticket to redefine what patriotism means in America today?
I just don't think we should kowtow to silliness. You can't get more patriotic than, I think I've said this before in Antioch. I was able to open a hotel to house homeless people. You can't get any more patriotic than caring about those on our streets. And that was from the Biden-Harris administration. We were able to launch a 24-hour community crisis response team to deal with our mentally ill on the streets. You can't get any more patriotic than funding programs like that wrap your arms around those who just need love at the end of the day. We run programs for youth and job training. We're doing a host of things with that we used with ARPA money. And if people want to parade around the country, hugging the American flag and pretending that that's patriotism, I'm not participating. Patriotism is being able to pass an Affordable Care Act or Obamacare and getting people the health care that they need. Patriotism is coming up with sound immigration policy so that we can find a pathway forward for those who have been here or those who came here by no choice of their own. That's patriotism, not flaunting a flag and saying, oh, this is what makes you patriotic. No, what those colors represent is care and concern for your neighbor. And so that is patriotic when you're able to demonstrate that to policy and budget decisions. And so I'm not playing in that space. I think that the Biden-Harris administration and Governor Walz have demonstrated their patriotism to this country by the policies that they passed in their states and throughout the country that say we care about Americans.
And of course, Kamala Harris has repeatedly challenged Trump to a debate. Donald Trump initially, when Biden was the nominee, said anytime, any place when Biden challenged him. Now that September 10th debate seems to be in the air, as Trump now has requested a specific time and a specific place, and that is Fox News. Do you think that there's likely to be a debate between Trump and Harris before November? And do you think there's also going to be a debate between Walz and Vance?
Well, I certainly hope so. I think it's part of American custom, American tradition that, both presidential candidates get up on stage one or two times and debate the issues and have a conversation with the American people. I think it's important. I think it's healthy for the democratic process. And so I really hope that they're able to hammer out these details and have a debate, as well as J.D. Vance and Governor Walz. I think that would be important too. On a personal note, I'd be entertained by Vance Walz debate. I think there would be a lot of fireworks and it would be fun. But overall, even outside the fun, I just think it's so crucial for the democratic process and for maintaining American tradition.
There's a lot of talk about Harris potentially following the Obama model in terms of appealing to a broad audience while countering Republican attacks. Given the differences in President Obama and Vice President Harris's political careers and the unique challenges that this election cycle presents, how well do you think Harris can adapt to this approach to her own campaign? And what should she borrow from Obama's playbook from 2008 and 2012? Where should she chart her own course?
Well, I think she's already charted her own course. She doesn't need to borrow anything. The reality is she was a prosecutor here in California. She served as an assistant district attorney in Alameda County, then San Francisco, and then went on to become the state's attorney general, then U.S. senator. And she's been prosecuting cases for a long, long time. And at the end of the day, this is what she'll be doing as a candidate for president, is prosecuting the case against Donald Trump. And there are, she's seen them all from all stripes, and Donald Trump is no different than the folks that she's had to send to jail. And so in this instance, all she's doing is convincing not a jury of 12 or 13 or 14 people. She's convincing the American people. And I think she'll be able to hold up and be able to do the job and carry the message and say, listen, this is a choice between going backwards or going and charting a new course for America.
So this past Tuesday, we also had a primary election cycle going on, and Representative Cori Bush's loss represents yet another blow to the progressive wings faction, the quote unquote the squad. With Representative Cori Bush's recent primary loss, we're seeing a notable shift in the political landscape, especially within the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. How do you interpret this trend? Does it signal to you a broader pushback against the progressive agenda, as many are characterizing it, or are there defeats more about individual vulnerabilities?
I think these losses don't represent a pushback on progressive politics. I think that these losses represent wins by AIPAC. And so if you could have been a moderate Democrat, you could have been a liberal Democrat and had the same stances as Cori Bush, or even someone over in New York, former congressman, now Bowman. And I think you would have been a target for AIPAC. And so I don't think it speaks to progressive ideas. I think it speaks to how much influence we're going to continue to have by outside groups in the political process. AIPAC plays an important role in American politics. And so, but the question is going to be how much influence are these groups going to have? So I think that's a broader question for the American people. I strongly believe in campaign finance reform, and this is an example of why I believe in campaign finance reform. And it's not about AIPAC. It's about groups like this having that much influence in a political decision.
And on that note, the role of AIPAC and other pro-Israel groups in Cori Bush's defeat has been significant, like you alluded to, millions pouring into this race. How do you see the influence of outside spending, particularly from groups like AIPAC, shaping the future of Democratic primaries? Are we witnessing, in your view, a new battleground where ideology and money collide and money is prevailing?
Well, again, I want to emphasize, because I don't want to, make this about because I just don't believe it's about ideology. I think in some instances it's very specific to one idea, it's no different than when Glover Norquist was going around the country trying to make Republicans sign some tax pledge, and if you didn't, then you were a target, and they'd spend exuberant amounts of money on you. And I just don't think that's right. I just don't think that one group should have that much influence in a political process. And so I don't want to make this about ideology, because to me it seems very tactical, and in many instances it's about one idea. And I just don't think it's right. I don't think it's right.
So Representative Bush's loss has also been attributed partly to her alienation of key allies, including labor unions. In your view, how crucial is it for progressive candidates to maintain strong ties with traditional Democratic constituencies? Is there a risk that the progressive movement could become too insular, losing touch with broader coalitions?
Repeat that question one more time.
Is there a risk that the progressive movement could become too insular, losing touch with broader coalitions? And how crucial is it, in your view?
Listen, the progressive movement has existed in this country for a long, long time. The New Deal was a progressive movement. Lyndon Johnson was a progressive movement. The Great Society were progressive ideas. The things that we live under today that came out of the Johnson administration were progressive ideas. A lot of people will suggest that, many of the things that have come out of the EPA are progressive ideas. That was founded thanks to Richard Nixon. We've always had a streak of progressivism throughout our history. And sometimes we've taken those ideas and made them mainstream. And then sometimes we have rejected those ideas. But progressivism will always have a role, just as conservatism, just as liberalism will always have a role in our politics. I don't think it's becoming insular. I think in the last few years, I think it's expanded to become more widely accepted. And we've really accepted certain ideas that we once thought, oh, absolutely not. Medicare for all? No, what a crazy idea. And I think because of people like Senator Bernie Sanders, some of these ideas have become mainstream. And so I don't think it's becoming more insular. But I do think that, sometimes there will be pushback from the American people and say, hey, maybe that's a bit too far. But that's fine. That's the process. That's democracy. That's how we figure things out.
Former President Trump's recent approach of endorsing multiple candidates in the same race raises questions about the strength of his influence. Now, he's endorsed many candidates, going back to since he won by the Electoral College in 2016, and it seems as if the GOP is just taking loss after loss after loss. They lost in 2017. They lost in 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023. Here we are in 2024, and he's decided to endorse multiple candidates still. How do you interpret this strategy? Does it reflect a diminishing of his power within the GOP, or is it a calculated move to maintain relevance across factions?
No, I think he's just been consolidating power. And you characterize the selection of J.D. Vance as one thing. The reality is the selection of J.D. Vance further illustrates the power and dominance he has over the Republican Party. And it's frankly disgusting. It's disgusting that a man who was once running around the country calling Donald Trump the Hitler of America now standing side by side praising this guy. It's disgusting to hear about backroom conversations with all these Republicans, and then they're all parading down to Mar-a-Lago kissing his rear end. And so I don't think one individual should have that type of dominance over one political party. I think it's wrong. I think it's disgusting. It is a march towards the wrong direction. And I hope that the Democratic Party can pick up lessons from this, that we have to preserve the processes in which we elect, nominees. We have to preserve the process in which the people select nominees at the local level, or else you just end up being ruled by one person. And I don't think it's right. I don't say this because I hate Republicans, or I think having a two-party system is healthy for the debate. But I get concerned that they become a party where you can't debate anything, because everything Donald Trump says is reality now in their bubble. I mean, I try to have conversations here in my own community. And then, there's a lady telling me that Kamala Harris isn't black. And I'm just looking at her like, you're from the Bay Area. Of course, she's black, but because Donald Trump said it, she's not black anymore. And I don't think in any world that's healthy. And we can laugh about, but I think it's, for all of us, for democracy, it's a step in the wrong direction. And I just hope that Democrats are watching this and saying, we can never allow this to happen in the Democratic Party. We can't just idealize one person.
We have a question from one of the viewers tuning in, and they want to know, in your view, does Kamala Harris's new running mate give the American people hope for the future? And I would add, in contrast to the other ticket, there was a lot of folks saying that Donald Trump's choice of J.D. Vance is a nod to the younger generation, being that J.D. Vance at the time was 39. He just turned 40 years old. He represents a new generation, the millennial generation. In your view, which ticket and which running mate gives the American people hope for the future?
Again, I think J.D. Vance's selection is not that. I just don't believe that. J.D. Vance, while he may be a millennial like myself, his ideas are backwards. And so there is nothing he represents about millennials today. So I think it's about power and dominance. And he's just showing them, look what I can do and what you can't do. And so I think Governor Walz's selection, I think I'm not in Kamala Harris's mind, and I'm not pretending to be in Kamala Harris's mind, but if I had to really assess and if I were making this decision, I would be taking into consideration that in the last few decades, white men have been leaving the Democratic Party. We are not speaking to their needs. And so I think, and when you look at the short list, it couldn't be any more obvious than that they're clearly concerned about this, because they were clearly trying to bring in a constituency that we've been losing over the last few decades. And that's not to suggest that we haven't seen a realignment in certain groups going to different parts. That's been happening for a long time, but I think it's very concerning that when the party of working people is losing white working class men at record numbers, we have to address that, and we can't pretend that it's not happening.
And going back to the recent primaries this past Tuesday, the primaries highlighted an internal struggle within both parties, from progressives challenging establishment Democrats to Trump's wavering influence in the GOP. How do you think these internal conflicts will impact party unity heading into the general election? Can the Democrats and Republicans effectively unify their respective parties, or will these divisions prove too deep, in your view?
I think we're talking about two different things. We're not comparing apples and oranges. I just don't believe that what's happening in the Republican Party is the same thing that's happening in the Democratic Party. The Republican Party has a serious problem with idealism, and that whatever Trump says is what goes, and that you have some reasonable people who are outnumbered trying to get the party focused on the right direction, on democratic values. I just think it's completely different. The internal conflicts in the Democratic Party, it's a maturation process. We're a growing tent, and I don't call it conflict, I call it maturation, because we're growing. And as we grow and we start to understand that maybe the way we operate should be different, or should go left or right, or whatever it may be, I think we'll be able to reasonably unify around. And you're seeing it right before our eyes. I don't have to say it. All you got to do is turn on your television, read the newspaper, and look at the polling, and you'll see that everybody is unifying around Vice President Kamala Harris and this now Harris-Walz ticket. And so I'm pretty excited about where we're going, but I don't think those internal conflicts or the maturation process is going to spill over into what we need to do to get the Democratic ticket elected. But the Lincoln Project exists not because there was an internal conflict in the Democratic Party. It exists because some people in the Republican Party said, they didn't even want to be in an internal conflict. They just said, we're out of here, and they left. And so I just genuinely believe that that's a problem that is not good for them, but it's also not good for democracy in America, because we need a two-party system in order to debate these issues, moderate our responses to crisis, moderate our responses to the problems and the challenges that we're trying to face today.
The close election between Representative Sri Thanedar over Detroit Council member Mary Waters in Detroit, which is a predominantly Black district, raises questions about the role of identity in electoral politics. How do you see the dynamics of race and representation playing out in future elections? Is identity becoming a more decisive factor, or are other issues overshadowing it?
I think identity has always played a role in our politics, and it hasn't always been favorable to minority candidates. I think in recent years, I think particularly here in California, we've seen a rise in women candidates, and I think that's good. So identity politics has played a role there, and so it will always play a role. We'll see in terms of I'm from California, so listen. In school, you study the Bradley effect. It can be real. Everybody's all excited about one particular candidate, and then next thing you know, everybody goes to the polls, and you're shocked at the results. We could say that about Hillary Clinton as well. Everybody was excited about the first woman president, and it turned out that a lot of white women weren't getting down with the program. And so, identity politics it always plays a role, and it can be good and it can be bad. But it will always play a role in this country, in particular, because historically we're the country that came up with a lot of different identities and races, and so of course it's a part of our DNA.
And to that point, as someone who's a surrogate for the campaign, do you fear that a lot of the internet hype and a lot of the excitement around this Harris campaign could potentially not result in voter turnout? You go back to Stacey Abrams, her second race actually was less impressive than her first race, where she was running against the same opponent, Brian Kemp. Now, women voters, white women voters in the state of Georgia, you and I met in the state of Georgia a few weeks ago. She was really making an appeal to them, and they did not go to her. And are you afraid that Kamala Harris would run into the same problem in states like Georgia or North Carolina?
I think the dynamics are different. I think the second time Stacey Abrams ran, she was running against an incumbent, and so that makes that shapes up the race a little differently. I think that here's some of that. I was there when John Kerry's military record was disgustingly torn apart. I was there when President Obama was elected. I wasn't a surrogate, but I certainly did drive down to South Carolina for the primary and volunteered my time. And there are some unique things that I see now that are very similar to President Obama's campaign for president. When you start seeing people do things that they wouldn't normally do, like show up to volunteer, like make a contribution, and they've never made a political contribution, where you have people in the heartland making artwork of Kamala Harris's face in their fields as they plowed them through. When you start saying things like that, and people not knowing what to do, but what they're talented in doing, when you got people say, "Hey, I'm willing to sell my bike for $20 so I can give it to the campaign." When you start seeing that type of stuff, it's very familiar to me from President Obama's campaign, and so that type of excitement, I just haven't seen in a long time. I did see some of it during the primaries for Bernie Sanders, But this type of excitement is very unique. You don't always see it, where everybody feels like they need to do something. And so that gives me optimism. That gives me hope. And I think it will translate into a November 5th victory. But yeah, there are just telltale signs that just are very, very familiar to me that I've only experienced really during the during the Obama campaign.
The setting of battleground matchups like Alyssa Slotkin versus Mike Rogers in Michigan for the Senate points to a high stakes general election. How do you view the importance of these kinds of races in determining the broader political climate? Could these contests become bellwethers for the national mood in 2024?
They can, and time will tell if they do. I try to be cautious about using bellwethers because something can happen and turn everything upside down. But if I had to take a wild guess, I do think some of these races can play a bellwether role. But again, outside of that, there are things happening throughout the country that are unusual, that are making people energized to want to show up and participate, that I think is a stronger bellwether than even an election result.
When you and I met, it was on the day that the announcement was released that Joe Biden wasn't going to seek re-election. And leading up to that moment, poll after poll showed that he was within the margin of error or trailing Donald Trump, his opponent, despite the fact that this administration is the only administration that has prioritized tackling student loan debt. This administration has made the largest and most historic investment in American history in combating climate change. It established the environmental center to combat racial injustice in the realm of environmental reform. It has delivered for the American people in terms of bipartisan legislation when you're talking about infrastructure, the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, the PACT Act. Yet poll after poll showed that despite all of the legislative success that this administration has had, it did not seem to resonate with people. Now, recent battleground state polls between Harris and Trump show Harris trailing Trump. Trump trailing Harris, forgive me. Trump trailing Harris in a lot of these polls. How do you interpret these early indicators? Is this a difference in messaging? Is this simply just the excitement of a new candidate? Do these polls reflect a broader acceptance of Harris as a viable leader? Or are they more about discontent with Trump's rhetoric and policies?
I think that there is a pageantry to the American presidency. I think that head of state means something to a lot of people, and I even myself underestimated. I think people were on par with some of the policies that President Biden had accomplished. I don't think that I think there are very little people who would say, "Oh, Joe Biden's work is terrible." I think the people who have benefited from student loan debt, I think the people who have benefited from insulin prices going down, I think the mayors who can talk about how the administration has helped them fund certain programs locally. Everybody has been touched by this administration in a positive way. So I don't think anybody would take that away from President Biden. What I do believe is that Americans do care about the role of head of state and what that looks like throughout the world. And this is, I have a great amount of respect for President Biden. Hey, listen, when these polls were not favorable, you saw my speech. I was all excited for Joe Biden. And there was nothing that was going to take that excitement away. But I do believe that people generally, when they look at the world stage and they look at their leaders, they want to see someone who is reflective of them, and not just in terms of race or gender, but just of youthfulness. And so it was an important factor. Clearly, it was an important factor for the American people, and we clearly saw that turnaround literally in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, the polls started to change. In 2 weeks, you started seeing excitement that you hadn't seen before on the Democratic side, and within 2 weeks, you saw that hangar in Detroit yesterday. I mean, all those people, and so there's a lot of excitement going around, but I think we underestimated what head of state means. And even though our Constitution isn't made for a king or a queen or anything like that, the reality is that some of those sentiments still exist because we do come from a British monarchy. Our history was that, and so people do value what it means to be head of state of this country. And so that's my opinion. Other political pundits may think differently, but I just think people visually have a respect for the pageantry of what is the American presidency.
And also, the change in fundraising. Vice President Kamala
Yeah.
Harris, she's outpaced Donald Trump in fundraising.
She's outpaced everybody. These are historic numbers. And in 2 weeks, this, I mean, she's really turned it around. And I just, it's unbelievable that only 4 years ago she couldn't win a primary. Yeah. And here we are 4 years later. Yeah. And she's making these record fundraising numbers. She's galvanizing voters. She's waking up people who have been asleep and didn't want to participate. I just find it amazing. But hey, listen, I'm all for it. I'm committed. I'm still gonna travel throughout the country on her behalf to make sure she's elected president.
Given Trump's previous dominance in the area of fundraising, how significant is this fundraising advantage for Harris, and what does it suggest about her appeal to both traditional donors and grassroots supporters?
Well, I think it speaks highly, and I think we often take for granted that as vice president, people were formulating an opinion of her, and so clearly that opinion is well respected. I mean, excuse me, the opinion that was formulating about her is that people have respect for her. People like her as much as they try to caricature her and minimize her. I think people saw beyond that and saw a pretty in-depth person who had a pretty strong background in the legal field, and more importantly, had a unique story that is uniquely American. And so I think people have appreciated all of that. And people, interestingly enough, have appreciated her being down with the people when it comes to hosting events at the vice president's house, or getting down at events with the people. And I mean, people have loved all this, and I think it has allowed her to have a charm that is unique to her.
With Trump's inflammatory rhetoric, the liberal prosecutor from San Francisco calling this ticket the most liberal ticket in American history, and his campaign's aggressive messaging strategy, how should the media, in your view, navigate the fine line between covering these attacks and giving them undue amplification? A lot of folks have criticized the media for the rise of Trump going back to 2015, 2016. I remember there were moments where they would say breaking news, and you would just see an empty podium. Now, that wasn't breaking news. Trump was scheduled to speak in that particular city for at least a few days now. But what responsibility does the media have in ensuring that the public discourse remains grounded in fact, especially when discussing issues like the supposed radicalism of the Harris-Walz ticket?
Yeah, I think Donald Trump's rise is, yes, attributed to the media for giving him unnecessary attention. But it's also a reflection of the American people and our fascination with reality TV, and our fascination with gossip and innuendo and nonsense. And we have to keep those things separated from the political process, because there are serious consequences as a result of that. This isn't the presidency isn't a soap opera. People who serve an elected office isn't a soap opera, and their personal lives are not a soap opera. And yet we've tried to mesh those things together. And yes, the media has played a significant role in that, and so has social media. And I think it's wrong, and I don't think it's right. That being said, I think that no, actually, that's all I'll say about that. I don't think there's anything else to say. But I'm sorry, the attacks on liberal. I think the reality is I don't think many people are paying much attention to Donald Trump these days anymore, and the things that he's bombasting out in the media, and they're not getting as much attention as they used to. And I think because I think Vice President Harris has been able to transcend all that soap opera news that I was talking about. This is a serious campaign that has serious consequences. And when she says we're not going back, or others say we're not going back, it literally means something. It doesn't mean we're just not going back for the sake of saying it. It means we're not going back to appointing crazy Supreme Court justices that are taking women's rights away. We're not going back to a time where they've constantly tried to repeal Obamacare and take people's health care away. And so, all that liberal talk, and everybody knows that that's not true. Everybody knows that Kamala Harris didn't lock up a whole bunch of black men. Everybody knows that she wasn't some cuckoo DA. She was a serious person. She continues to be a very serious person in her work. And I just don't think people are buying that nonsense anymore. And I'm glad the media isn't paying as much attention to it as they used to when Trump says these. I got a breaking news about Vance saying something that I just delete. It's just noise. There's no seriousness to it.
And the Trump campaign has repeatedly tried to distance itself from Project 2025. Recently, even last night, you had Steve Miller, one of Trump's closest advisors, on the show, the Ari Melber show on MSNBC, distancing himself from Project 2025. What do you think about this maneuver to, act as if this is just an independent project that was created by the Heritage Foundation? It has not been adopted by the Trump campaign. I've always said, the Heritage Foundation has done this before. Going back to 1980, they presented proposals to then President-elect Ronald Reagan, and a significant amount of those proposals were enacted by the end of Reagan's first term. And here we are again, over 40 years later, and the Heritage Foundation is at it again. And the Trump campaign is playing dumb. They're acting like we don't really have a connection with that project. But come 2025, if this election goes their way, I'm sure we'll see it. They'll be singing a different tune. What are your thoughts about that?
Nobody believes that Project 2025 is not Donald Trump. Only Donald Trump seems to want to believe that. And so we know that these are their ideas. We know that, let's not pretend that, while Trump has been very, very skillful at dominating the Republican Party, let's not pretend that there aren't strings over Donald Trump's head and shoulders. And it's these people from Project 2025, and it's the Heritage Foundation. These are the same people who gave him the list of Supreme Court justices in terms of who to appoint. And so if Donald Trump is Project 2025. They want to get rid of the Department of Education. They want to strike down Title I, Title VI, Title IX. They want to get rid of Obamacare. These people have no end to their craziness. And the idea that they don't control Donald Trump, oh, please give me a break.
Do you think that the distancing from Project 2025 and the labeling of the Harris-Walz ticket as extremely far left, extremely liberal, is going to have any impact on the Rust Belt and Sun Belt states? A lot of folks said, well, Harris should have gone with Shapiro because we would have definitely won the state of Pennsylvania. Do you have any concerns about the ticket's chances in the Rust Belt with Trump's labeling and with this distancing from these proposals from Project 2025?
Vice President Harris and Governor Walz are going to win this election based on their ideas for moving America forward, based on how to continue to build an inclusive tent in the Democratic Party that uplifts every voice, including the voice of white men, particularly white working class men. That's how we're going to win this election. Trump in his nonsense and Trump and his weirdo candidate for vice president aren't going to be the reason that they lose. The reality is I think President Trump is running out. Former President Trump is running out of steam because I think he has used every tool in his toy chest, and he's run out of tools. And so I don't know how many different ways he could call someone crooked Kamala, crooked Hillary, crooked Joe, the Biden crime family, liberal, whatever. All this stuff is just it's nonsense. It's a joke, and I'm just so happy that the American people have just risen above that noise and said, you know what? Let's just focus on a brighter future. Let's focus on what these two individuals can offer. And recognizing that, yes, all of these ideas that we're all benefiting from today can be easily taken away like that if Donald Trump is elected president. And so we want our senior citizens to have insulin that is not excessively expensive. We want people to keep their health care. We want to make sure that we're reducing student debt. We want to make sure that mayors have the tools and resources from the federal government to allow them to deal with homelessness, mental health issues, all these things that we haven't all normally done. And so all of this can go away overnight if Donald Trump is elected president. Nobody can say that more clearly. That's just a reality.
You know, I've always said this election is interesting for many reasons, but this election really, it seems like the first time the Obama coalition is going at it against the Trump coalition, the coalition that is embracive of a multiracial society, the coalition that Obama built with young minorities, whites from the Midwest, folks who are, looking towards the next 15, 20 years. And then those who are looking behind, back to a past that they miss, those who are reminiscent of a time in society where things were, according to them, more in alignment with their favor. The predominantly white coalition. I mean, and it's obvious. Just look at the RNC. Just look at the faces of the RNC, and you'll see that what I'm saying seems to be a little accurate. I mean, in your view, what are your thoughts about the potential turnout for both of these coalitions coming at it in this election? And one of the major issues that Trump has purposefully decided to use, because he told Republican lawmakers not to vote for the bill James Lankford put forward, a conservative senator from the state of Oklahoma. And that issue is immigration. He wanted to run on immigration. He wanted to have that as a key issue to use against President Biden. And now they're trying to use it again. But this time, Harris is showing the receipts to the American people. And she's telling folks that it was Trump who tanked that bill. What are your concerns for the potential turnout of both sides? And particularly as it pertains to this issue on immigration, do you think that the Republicans are going to still prevail on this issue on immigration? Or do you think the American people would take notice of what the Harris campaign is saying and saying, no, Trump deliberately chose to do nothing, chose inaction for political purposes?
Well, I think it's important to note that. So, I don't see it as the Obama coalition or the Trump coalition. We've been a multiracial country since day one. The question was who got to participate in the political process, and it was just white men, and white men who had wealth. And so white working men didn't get to participate either if they weren't landowners. So I say that because I think it's important to note that the coalition that I believe Vice President Harris and Governor Walz are building is the American coalition. The American coalition that says everybody is welcome to participate, whether you're LGBTQ plus, whether you're Latino, whether you're African American, whether you're working class, whether you're middle class, everybody gets to participate, whether you're wealthy. Even wealthy people get to be part of the Democratic Party. Everybody has a place here. And what then that leaves behind is the people, not all of them, but the people who have very conservative framework, which is fine. And then there are just people who haven't gotten over the results of the Civil War. They still exist and they're still part of our country and they're here. And so that leaves behind what Kevin McCarthy, the former Speaker of the House, would say is this beautiful rainbow of multiracialness of what America is. And then this country club over here that nobody can participate in. And so I think that's what we're seeing play out. And it's, it's a sad reality, but it's where we're at. The reality is both parties should have a multiracial component because both parties should be in tune with the changing of America that's been constantly evolving throughout our history. And so they haven't gotten it. And so they'll continue to look like the country club that nobody gets to participate in unless you're a wealthy white landowner. And that's where we're at. And I think at the end of the day, the more realistic picture of what is America is going to be what will become the Kamala Harris coalition.
And before I let you go, Mayor Thorpe, do you mind sharing with the audience your personal life trajectory and how it aligns with being a surrogate for this particular campaign in this moment in history?
Well, it's funny. Believe it or not, I used to be a Republican. When I was in high school, I was a member of the Young California Republicans, but it had to do, interestingly enough, with my life. I was born in prison, raised in foster care. In fifth grade, I was placed in special education, and then graduated high school. I couldn't really read and write, so I always had I think maybe I'll call it a chip on my shoulder, because I wasn't raised by my biological family. I wasn't raised by Black people, and so I think I always went out of my way not to be Black, and it was interesting. And so part of becoming a Republican was that I knew that a lot of Black people just didn't participate in the Republican Party, and so it was just helpful for my identity at the time in rejecting Blackness and wanting to be something that I clearly was not. And so, so having met my biological mother years later, when I was serving in the United States Navy in prison, served as kind of a turning point for why my politics changed. And so, no one chooses to want to be in prison. You make bad choices in life and you can end up in prison, but no one sets out to do that. No one sets out to be a drug addict. No one sets out to have to give their children up because they don't have the capacity to raise them. And so obviously it brought a lot of empathy in terms of how I saw the world and what these political parties. So when I hear the rhetoric on the right, I just, trying to get rid of social safety nets, the social safety nets that allowed me to be in foster care and be raised by a great family who immigrated here from Mexico, who were able to become citizens because of a process that Ronald Reagan approved back in the 1980s. Ideas that gave me the supports throughout school for special education through Title I. The ability to go to school in college through federal programs like Pell Grants and whatnot. I would have never been able to I couldn't afford to go to George Washington University on my own, out of foster. I mean, that would have been ridiculous. I couldn't afford that. But thanks to programs like the GI Bill, thanks to programs like those Pell Grants that I was talking about, they made a reality. They made a path forward for me that was unique for me, but helped me get to where I'm at today. And that's as the mayor of the city of Antioch. So when I hear the rhetoric on the right, and when I hear especially about Project 2025, my stomach absolutely turns, because all that is personal to me. And what makes it more aggravating, for lack of a better term, is when they have a pattern of actually implementing these things. Women today don't have a choice, and that's not right. Women today are the only group in this country who have laws that govern their bodies. We as men do not. And I just don't think that's right. And when you see that they're willing to do these things without blinking, I'm just like, how do we sit here and think that they're not going to get rid of the Department of Education, and that they're not going to do these things? They're not going to get rid of Obamacare, the things that have made people healthy over the years. Imagine going through a pandemic without Obamacare. These things are real. This stuff is really happening. And so, no, I take it all personal. Yeah, it's very personal for me. Joe Biden could have been 100 years old. I would have been out there championing for Joe Biden, because these things are a threat to our country and a threat to the livelihood of people throughout our country. And so I wasn't going to sit there just lying around taking it.
Mayor Lamar Hernandez-Thorpe, it's been a pleasure and an honor to have you on the Political Mic.
Thank you.
I thoroughly enjoyed this discussion and learned a lot from you, and I'm sure the audience feels the exact same way. Thank you for, dedicating time out of your busy schedule to be a part of this platform.
Absolutely, and thank you, Mike, for doing this. This is, I looked into your podcast here, and you had some pretty impressive individuals on your podcast, and I got to tell you, I was thoroughly impressed. And I think this is important in terms of keeping the political discourse healthy.
Thank you so much, Mayor Thorpe. With that being said, that's going to conclude this episode of the Political Mic podcast. Thank you all for tuning in.